You didn't arrive here by accident, and this isn't flattery or coincidence. This video appears only when something has already moved beneath the surface of your experience. Not outwardly. Not dramatically. Internally. Subtly. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with recognition. You are seeing this because your inner state has already changed enough to intersect it. The field does not respond to curiosity or effort. It responds to coherence. And coherence is already present. Most people believe they search for information, for signs, for confirmation. In reality, information aligns with them when their frequency allows it. You don't find signals like this. You match them. Reality is not something you chase forward. It is something that mirrors back to you when your inner state stabilizes into a specific pattern. This video is not a destination. It is a reflection. That is why this moment likely feels calm, neutral, or strangely obvious. Not thrilling. Not overwhelming. Just quietly precise. This is what alignment feels like before the mind tries to label it. When recognition happens, there is no strain involved. No pushing. No convincing. Something simply settles, and the nervous system relaxes into a knowing it cannot yet explain. You have been conditioned to see yourself as a seeker moving through a fixed external world. That model ends here. You are not a small entity navigating timelines from the outside. You are consciousness itself, selecting experience through state, not action. The moment your inner frequency changes, the version of reality you experience reorganizes with it. Not later. Not eventually. Now. This is the law. Notice what did not occur. You did not force yourself to be here. You did not plan this alignment. You did not effort your way into this moment. That absence of force is the signal. Control creates resistance. Allowing creates flow. And flow always brings confirmation without asking permission from the mind. This is why recognition is more powerful than desire. Desire implies distance. Recognition implies presence. The moment something resonates as true, it is no longer something you are trying to reach. It is something you are remembering. And memory collapses time. This is how shifts happen quietly, without friction, without spectacle. If you pay attention, you can feel it. A subtle sense that something has already changed, even if nothing visible has rearranged yet. That is how timeline selection begins. Not with action, but with identity. Not with effort, but with alignment. Not with noise, but with stillness. This video is not here to persuade you. It is here because part of you already knows. And knowing does not argue. It simply recognizes itself. Subscribe, so you can stay within this frequency. When people imagine a timeline shift, they expect intensity. A dramatic before and after. A surge of emotion. A clear event they can point to and say, this is when everything changed. But real shifts almost never announce themselves that way. They arrive quietly. So quietly that the mind often mislabels them as boredom, confusion, or loss of motivation. In truth, what you are experiencing is recalibration. A timeline does not change by explosion. It changes by detachment. The first signal is not excitement, but neutrality. Familiar patterns no longer stimulate you the way they once did. Old desires feel distant. Conversations, routines, and even ambitions that once pulled at you now register as flat. This is not stagnation. This is what happens when your inner frequency no longer matches what used to surround you. The mind resists this phase because it cannot measure progress without contrast. When there is no struggle, it assumes something is wrong. When there is no urgency, it assumes nothing is happening. But the field does not operate on urgency. It operates on coherence. And coherence often feels calm before it feels expansive. This is where many people try to force movement. They attempt to recreate emotion, reattach to old goals, or manufacture motivation. That effort creates friction, because it is an attempt to re-enter a frequency you have already outgrown. The discomfort you feel is not a lack of alignment. It is evidence of it. You are no longer being pulled by what does not belong to you. Timeline shifts remove noise before they introduce novelty. The system clears space before it fills it. That clearing can feel like emptiness if you are still expecting stimulation from the old pattern. But emptiness is not absence. It is availability. It is the field creating room for a different configuration to stabilize. Notice how little effort this requires. You are not doing anything to cause this detachment. It is happening on its own because your internal state has already changed. This is why trying to fix the feeling only deepens the confusion. There is nothing to fix. There is something completing. The body understands this before the mind does. The nervous system relaxes even as the mind questions. There is less anxiety, less urgency, less compulsion to chase outcomes. That calm can feel unsettling if your identity was built around striving. But calm is not collapse. Calm is alignment without resistance. A dramatic shift would require force. A quiet shift requires readiness. You are not being pushed into a new timeline. You are settling into one. And settling does not make noise. It stabilizes. It becomes normal before it becomes noticeable. If you are experiencing a strange neutrality, a sense of being between versions of yourself, understand this clearly. You are not lost. You are transitioning. The old timeline is no longer gripping you, and the new one does not need your effort to arrive. It only needs you to stop misinterpreting silence as failure. This phase passes naturally when it is not interfered with. When you allow the calm to be what it is, the next configuration reveals itself without force. This is how real change works. Quietly. Precisely. Inevitably. There is a specific moment when your reality no longer fits, and it does not arrive with drama. It arrives as a quiet incompatibility. The things you once wanted still exist, but they no longer pull you. The routines you maintain still function, but they no longer feel necessary. Even the version of yourself you were invested in begins to feel distant, like a role you've already completed. This is not failure. This is not loss. This is outgrowing a frequency. Most people misunderstand this phase because they associate growth with acquisition. More clarity, more motivation, more certainty. But before expansion, there is release. And release often feels like emptiness if you are still measuring yourself by what you used to desire. When an identity dissolves, the mind panics because it mistakes detachment for regression. In truth, detachment is evidence that the old pattern no longer matches who you are becoming. You are not losing interest because something is wrong. You are losing interest because your inner state has shifted. Desire is frequency specific. When your frequency changes, the objects of desire must change with it. If they do not, they fall away. This is not something you decide. It happens naturally, the same way a child outgrows toys without needing to destroy them. Discomfort arises when you try to maintain loyalty to an outdated version of yourself. You tell yourself you should still care, still want, still strive. That internal pressure creates friction because it asks you to remain aligned with a timeline you have already exited. The discomfort is not a signal to go back. It is a signal that the transition is underway. Outgrowing a reality feels strange because it removes meaning before it replaces it. The old motivations fade first. The new ones have not yet stabilized. This in-between space can feel disorienting if you believe you are supposed to always know what comes next. But consciousness does not move that way. It releases before it reveals. It clears before it fills. Notice how little effort this requires. You are not forcing yourself to let go. You are simply no longer energized by what used to define you. That absence of charge is not numbness. It is neutrality. And neutrality is the ground state where new configurations can emerge without distortion. This is why trying to label this phase as loss creates unnecessary suffering. Loss implies something was taken. Nothing has been taken from you. Something has completed. Completion does not need justification. It does not ask permission from the mind. It simply withdraws energy and leaves clarity in its place. You are not meant to resurrect old desires to prove continuity. You are meant to allow them to dissolve so something more accurate can take their place. Identity is not meant to be preserved. It is meant to evolve. And evolution rarely feels like progress while it is happening. If you feel detached from who you were, that is not an absence of self. It is the loosening of an outdated structure. You are not disappearing. You are reorganizing. The field responds to what you are now, not what you used to be. Let that be enough. Let the outgrowing complete. The next alignment does not require your effort. It requires your permission to stop holding what no longer belongs. Something fundamental must be understood before anything else can stabilize. Reality does not respond to your thoughts the way you were taught. It does not respond to words, affirmations, or intentions held at the surface of the mind. Reality responds to emotion. Not as reaction, but as instruction. This section exists to recalibrate how you interpret what you feel, because emotion is not a side effect of experience. It is the mechanism through which experience is selected. Emotion is frequency in motion. It is the language the field understands without translation. Every emotional state you occupy is an instruction broadcast outward, not as a request, but as a declaration of identity. The field does not judge these instructions. It does not reward or punish them. It simply reflects them. Expansion signals alignment. Contraction signals misalignment. That is all. Nothing more. Nothing personal. Most people have been conditioned to treat emotion as something to suppress, control, or override. Positive emotions are labeled good. Negative emotions are labeled bad. This framing creates confusion, because it turns guidance into judgment. When you feel contraction, it is not a failure. It is a directional indicator. It is consciousness telling you that the current orientation no longer matches who you are becoming. Expansion feels like ease, openness, curiosity, or calm clarity. Contraction feels like tightness, resistance, heaviness, or urgency. Neither is wrong. Both are information. The mistake is trying to force expansion by ignoring contraction. When you do that, you silence the signal while continuing the broadcast. The field keeps responding, and you wonder why nothing changes. Emotion does not ask you to act immediately. It asks you to notice. Recognition alone begins the shift. The moment you see contraction as guidance instead of threat, resistance softens. Control loosens. And when control loosens, coherence returns. This is why allowing is more powerful than effort. Allowing realigns the signal without adding noise. You are not meant to chase positive emotion or avoid discomfort. You are meant to read emotion accurately. Expansion is confirmation that you are aligned with your current identity. Contraction is confirmation that you are not. Both serve you. Both refine your trajectory. Contrast sharpens clarity. This is the law. Pay attention to how little effort this requires. You do not need to fix how you feel. You do not need to analyze it endlessly. You only need to stop arguing with it. Emotion does not need your agreement to function as guidance. It only needs your awareness. If this distinction is landing for you, if something in you recognizes the precision of this mechanism, make that recognition visible. Click the like button now as a clear signal of alignment. Not as approval, but as acknowledgement that this frequency resonates. The field responds to coherence, not force. The more accurately you read emotion, the less effort creation requires. You stop trying to control outcomes and start allowing trajectories to reveal themselves. This is not surrender as weakness. This is surrender as intelligence. From this point forward, emotion is no longer something that happens to you. It is something that speaks through you. When you listen without judgment, reality reorganizes accordingly. Quietly. Reliably. Always. Forcing feels productive to the mind, but it collapses the field every time. Control is not power. Control is tension. And tension distorts the signal you are sending before it ever reaches reality. When you try to make something happen, you introduce urgency. Urgency is a declaration that you do not trust the present configuration. The field reads that immediately. Effort is not inherently wrong, but effort driven by fear creates resistance. It is the difference between movement and strain. Movement flows from alignment. Strain comes from trying to override misalignment instead of listening to it. When you force, you are not amplifying your signal. You are scrambling it. This is why forcing often produces the opposite of what is intended. The more you push, the more fragmented your frequency becomes. You say you want expansion, but you broadcast contraction. You say you trust the outcome, but you act as if it must be wrestled into existence. Reality does not respond to what you say. It responds to what you are. Control arises when the mind believes it must manage outcomes to feel safe. But safety does not come from domination. It comes from coherence. When your inner state is stable, action becomes precise. When your inner state is unstable, action becomes noise. The field mirrors that instability faithfully, without judgment. Allowing is not passivity. It is not waiting. It is the absence of resistance. When you allow, you stop interfering with the natural reorganization that is already underway. You stop gripping the steering wheel while the current is carrying you exactly where your frequency leads. Allowing restores clarity because it removes the need to fight what is already happening. Notice how often forcing is driven by impatience. Impatience signals a belief that the present moment is insufficient. That belief fractures coherence. Creation only happens now. When you rush away from now, you remove yourself from the only point where alignment can occur. The field cannot respond to a future you are mentally projecting. It can only respond to the state you occupy. This is why calm receptivity attracts while intensity repels. Calm is a signal of trust. Trust tells the field that you are aligned with your trajectory. Intensity driven by need tells the field that you are attempting to compensate for a lack of alignment. The field always responds to the truest signal, not the loudest one. Let go of the idea that effort proves worthiness. Worthiness is not earned. It is assumed through identity. When you stop forcing, you do not lose momentum. You regain it. Action that arises from coherence requires less energy and produces clearer results because it is not fighting itself. You are not here to bend reality to your will. You are here to align with it. Alignment does not demand. It allows. And allowing does not mean nothing happens. It means what happens is not distorted by resistance. When you feel the urge to force, pause. That pause is not delay. It is recalibration. In that space, coherence returns. And when coherence returns, the field opens without effort. This is the paradox. The less you try to control the outcome, the more precisely it unfolds. Desire is often misunderstood as the engine of creation, but desire does not move the field. Desire points to movement that has not yet stabilized. It signals interest, not alignment. The field does not reorganize around what you want. It reorganizes around what you are. This distinction changes everything. Wanting contains distance. It implies that something exists outside your current state and must be reached, acquired, or convinced to arrive. That implication creates fragmentation. Your words may say you are ready, but your emotional state says you are waiting. The field responds to the emotional state, not the request. It always has. Being is different. Being is coherence between identity and emotion. When who you believe yourself to be matches how you feel, there is no distance. No chase. No tension. The signal becomes clean. In that clarity, timelines select themselves without effort. Not because you asked, but because you aligned. This is why people can desire the same outcome for years without movement, while others experience rapid shifts without trying. The difference is not worthiness or discipline. It is coherence. The field mirrors coherence instantly because coherence is stability. Instability requires correction. Stability requires reflection. Notice how this removes pressure. You do not need to convince reality of anything. You do not need to intensify desire or repeat intentions. You only need to notice whether your identity and emotional state agree. When they do, the field opens. When they do not, resistance appears. This is feedback, not punishment. Coherence feels like calm certainty. Not excitement. Not urgency. A quiet sense that nothing needs to be added or removed. This state cannot be forced because forcing introduces contradiction. You cannot force being. You either are, or you are not. Recognition is the shift. When you attempt to desire your way into a new timeline, you remain anchored to the old one. Wanting keeps you oriented toward absence. Being orients you toward presence. The field always responds to presence. Presence is the only instruction it recognizes. This is why identity is the true selector. When you identify as someone waiting for change, you select timelines that confirm waiting. When you identify as someone aligned, you select timelines that reflect alignment. No action required. No effort demanded. The mirror adjusts automatically. If this lands, pause and feel it. Not intellectually. Somatically. Notice the difference between wanting something to change and allowing yourself to be someone for whom change is natural. That difference is coherence. Make this moment active. Scroll down and leave a comment now with the words, "I am ready." Not as affirmation, but as declaration. This is a signal to yourself and to the field that you recognize your alignment. The moment you stop asking reality to respond and start allowing yourself to be coherent, response becomes inevitable. This is not optimism. This is mechanics. The field does not negotiate. It reflects. You were never meant to chase timelines. You stabilize them by becoming consistent with them. Desire may initiate curiosity, but coherence completes the shift. Let that be clear. Let that be enough. Contrast was never placed in your path to stop you. It was introduced to tune you. This matters, because the meaning you assign to resistance determines whether it refines you or fractures you. When you believe contrast exists as punishment, you tighten against it. When you recognize it as calibration, you soften, and alignment accelerates. Contrast is how clarity is sharpened. Without it, desire remains vague. Identity remains undefined. Consciousness uses opposition not as an obstacle, but as a lens. Each experience that felt difficult was not a verdict on your worth or readiness. It was information. It showed you what no longer fit, what could not come with you, what required refinement before coherence could stabilize. The mistake is believing contrast means you chose wrong. In truth, contrast appears only when a selection is already underway. You do not encounter resistance unless something is being reorganized. The field introduces tension to highlight misalignment, not to trap you inside it. This is why emotional contraction often precedes expansion. The signal tightens before it clears. Blame narratives collapse this process. When you tell yourself you failed, waited too long, or made the wrong choices, you turn calibration into judgment. Judgment adds weight. Weight slows movement. Contrast does not ask you to analyze your past. It asks you to release identification with it. The lesson completes the moment you stop arguing with it. Notice how contrast loses power once it is seen accurately. Experiences that once felt personal dissolve into neutrality when you recognize their function. They were never about you as an individual. They were about alignment. Consciousness was not testing you. It was tuning the signal so a different timeline could become accessible. Contrast also reveals where control was present. Resistance intensifies when you attempt to force outcomes or cling to identities that no longer match your frequency. The discomfort was not caused by the situation itself, but by the effort to maintain coherence with something that had already expired. Once that effort ends, contrast completes its role. This reframing releases the need to forgive, heal, or resolve the past in the way you were taught. There is nothing to fix. There is nothing to correct. Calibration does not leave wounds. It leaves clarity. The moment clarity arrives, the experience loses its grip because its function has been fulfilled. Contrast does not follow you forward. It dissolves when its purpose is complete. The reason it feels distant now is because it no longer needs to speak loudly. You heard it. You adjusted. The signal changed. That is the end of the transaction. This is why revisiting old resistance often feels strangely empty. The emotional charge is gone. The story no longer holds weight. This is not avoidance. This is integration. When a frequency shift occurs, the field stops reflecting lessons that are no longer required. Understand this clearly. Nothing you experienced blocked your path. Everything you experienced refined it. The tuning is complete the moment you stop identifying as someone who needed to suffer to earn alignment. Alignment was always responding to you. Contrast simply helped you hear it. From this point forward, there is no need to revisit what has already calibrated you. The signal is cleaner now. The noise has done its work. Allow the refinement to stand without revisiting the friction that made it possible. Creation does not wait for the future to arrive. It does not respond to plans, timelines, or imagined outcomes. Creation happens only now. Not symbolically. Mechanically. The present moment is not a bridge between past and future. It is the only point where the field can receive a signal. When you move your attention away from now, you remove yourself from the point of influence. Waiting fractures frequency. It subtly tells the field that alignment exists somewhere else, sometime later, once conditions improve or certainty arrives. That belief creates distance. Distance creates incoherence. The field cannot respond to a state that is not present. It can only reflect the emotional and identity configuration you are occupying now. This is why anticipation often delays what you think you are preparing for. Anticipation contains tension. It assumes incompletion. It broadcasts that something is missing. Even hopeful waiting is still waiting. It keeps your signal oriented toward absence rather than presence. The field mirrors that orientation faithfully. Presence stabilizes timelines because presence collapses contradiction. When you are fully here, there is no argument with reality. No negotiation. No projection. The signal becomes singular. Clean. Undivided. In that coherence, the field reorganizes naturally, because there is nothing interfering with reflection. The mind resists this because it believes creation requires planning, sequencing, and control. Those tools are useful for navigation, but they are not the source. The source is state. The present moment holds state. The future holds concepts. Concepts do not instruct the field. State does. Notice how different it feels to be here without reaching forward. There is less urgency. Less mental noise. Less internal commentary. That quiet is not emptiness. It is alignment. It is the absence of contradiction. An absence of contradiction is power. This does not mean you stop moving or acting. It means action arises from presence rather than compensation. When action emerges from now, it carries coherence. When it emerges from waiting, it carries strain. The same behavior can produce entirely different results depending on the state that generated it. Creation cannot be postponed because the field does not store requests. It responds in real time. Every moment you are present, you are broadcasting. Every moment you are waiting, you are also broadcasting. The difference is clarity. Presence says, this is who I am now. Waiting says, this is who I am not yet. This is why trying to be patient for something to arrive often backfires. Patience framed as endurance still assumes lack. True presence does not endure. It inhabits. It does not ask when. It stabilizes now and allows the timeline to adjust accordingly. If you feel stalled, check where your attention is. Not what you are doing, but where you are oriented. Are you here, or are you mentally rehearsing a future moment where things finally align? The field responds to orientation, not intention. The present moment does not need improvement to function. It only needs your agreement to be where creation actually occurs. When you stop deferring alignment to later, later collapses into now. And when that happens, timelines do not need to be chased. They converge. Quietly. Immediately. Inevitably. Stillness is often misunderstood because it does not look like progress from the outside. The mind associates power with movement, urgency, and visible action. When those signals disappear, it assumes something has gone wrong. In reality, stillness is not the absence of momentum. It is the point where momentum has stabilized. Stillness is readiness. It is the state where the signal no longer wavers. Before expansion occurs, frequency must settle. If it does not, movement becomes erratic. Neutrality is not stagnation. Neutrality is coherence without interference. It is the threshold state where the field can respond cleanly because the instruction is no longer distorted. This is why so many shifts occur after periods of quiet. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything unnecessary stopped happening. Stillness removes excess. It dissolves the need to prove, to chase, to force outcomes into alignment. When that pressure disappears, the system becomes receptive. Receptivity is power. The discomfort with stillness comes from identity. If your sense of self was built around striving, effort, or constant improvement, neutrality feels threatening. It feels like disappearance. But what is actually dissolving is not you. It is the identity that required motion to feel real. When that identity relaxes, something more stable emerges. Stillness is the moment the signal becomes unmistakable. There is no contradiction between what you feel and who you believe yourself to be. There is no urgency pulling you forward or fear pushing you back. The field reads this state as clarity. And clarity invites movement without resistance. Expansion does not begin with excitement. It begins with quiet certainty. The nervous system settles. The mind stops narrating. The need to anticipate fades. That calm is not emptiness. It is alignment in its most efficient form. From there, action arises naturally, without deliberation or force. Many people interrupt this phase because they mistake it for delay. They try to stimulate themselves back into motion. They search for motivation, inspiration, or direction. In doing so, they reintroduce noise. The field responds by slowing things down again, not as punishment, but as correction. It is guiding them back to stillness. Stillness does not mean you withdraw from life. It means life no longer pulls you out of coherence. You are available without being reactive. Open without being scattered. Present without being tense. This is the state in which timelines stabilize before they advance. Think of stillness as the inhale before movement. The inhale is not inactivity. It is preparation. Without it, the exhale is weak. Without stillness, expansion lacks direction. Consciousness pauses here to ensure the signal is clean before allowing it to amplify. If you find yourself in a quiet phase where nothing demands you, nothing excites you, and nothing disturbs you, do not rush to label it. You are not stuck. You are not regressing. You are at the point of power. Remain here without interference. When movement comes, it will be precise, effortless, and unmistakably aligned. Before anything else can be understood, one assumption must be released. You do not move into timelines through effort, strategy, or action. You do not enter them the way you enter a room. Timelines are not locations you travel to. They are states you inhabit. More precisely, they are identities you become. This is the shift that dissolves effort-based change entirely. Action has been overemphasized because identity is invisible. You were taught that doing creates becoming. In reality, becoming determines doing. The field does not respond to what you attempt. It responds to what you are consistent with. The moment your identity stabilizes, the timeline that matches it becomes unavoidable. This is why trying to change outcomes without changing identity creates friction. You may take all the right steps and still feel resistance. That resistance is not random. It is coherence correcting itself. The field is signaling that the actions you are taking belong to a version of you that no longer exists or has not yet stabilized. Action without identity alignment is noise. Becoming is not something you force. It happens through recognition. The moment you see yourself differently, reality reorganizes to reflect that self-view. Not because you deserve it. Not because you earned it. Because the signal changed. Identity is the instruction the field responds to most clearly. Notice how this removes the pressure to improve yourself. Improvement assumes inadequacy. Inadequacy fragments frequency. Identity does not improve. It shifts. One state gives way to another when it is no longer coherent. This is not progress as the mind understands it. This is alignment revealing itself. When you believe you must enter a better timeline, you imply that you are currently outside it. That belief anchors you to separation. When you recognize that timelines emerge from identity, separation collapses. There is nowhere to go. There is only something to be. This is why sudden changes often occur after quiet realizations rather than intense effort. Someone stops seeing themselves as struggling, and struggle dissolves. Someone stops identifying with waiting, and opportunities appear. These shifts look magical from the outside, but they are mechanical. Identity changed. The field followed. You cannot fake identity. The field responds to coherence, not performance. Trying to act like someone you do not believe yourself to be creates contradiction. That contradiction slows everything down. When identity is honest and settled, action becomes effortless because it is no longer compensating for misalignment. Becoming does not require time. It requires clarity. The moment you stop identifying as someone trying to get somewhere, you become someone who is already there. That recognition collapses distance. Timelines do not need to be entered after that. They stabilize around you. This is why waiting for permission, readiness, or confidence keeps movement delayed. Those states do not arrive before identity shifts. They arrive after. Identity leads. Experience follows. You are not meant to climb into a better future. You are meant to align with a truer version of yourself in the present. When that happens, the timeline you call future reveals itself as the only one that could respond. Effort fades. Motion clarifies. And becoming does the work action never could. Recognition is the mechanism because recognition ends seeking. The moment you recognize something as true, effort dissolves. There is no gap between understanding and integration. There is no distance to cross. What you recognize does not need to be practiced or reinforced. It settles instantly, because recognition is not learning. It is remembering. Learning implies accumulation. It assumes something is missing and must be added over time. Recognition reveals that nothing was missing at all. What shifts is not information, but orientation. You stop relating to reality from the position of someone trying to get somewhere, and start relating from the position of someone who already knows. The field responds to that orientation immediately. This is why change often happens in moments that feel anticlimactic. There is no struggle, no build-up, no emotional crescendo. Something simply clicks, and the system reorganizes. The mind expects transformation to feel like effort because effort has been mistaken for value. Recognition bypasses that entire framework. It does not ask for permission from habit or logic. It simply reorders coherence. Recognition is quiet because it does not negotiate. When you recognize a truth, you do not argue with it. You do not try to apply it. You do not attempt to become it. You see it. And seeing is enough. The moment of seeing collapses time. The future rearranges because the present identity has shifted. This is why repetition without recognition produces nothing. You can repeat affirmations, visualize outcomes, rehearse beliefs, and still feel stuck. Those practices remain external until recognition occurs. Recognition does not come from repetition. It comes from readiness. It arrives when resistance has softened enough for clarity to land. Recognition also cannot be forced. The more you try to understand something, the more you reinforce the identity of someone who does not yet understand. That identity delays the shift. Recognition arrives when the effort to understand stops. When the mind relaxes its grip, the signal stabilizes, and the truth reveals itself without explanation. This reframes growth entirely. You are not here to accumulate techniques. You are here to remember what you already are. Each realization peels away an identity that was never permanent. Each recognition simplifies rather than complicates. Complexity belongs to the mind. Recognition belongs to consciousness. Notice how recognition feels in the body. There is often a soft exhale. A sense of inevitability. Not excitement, but relief. As if something you were holding without realizing it has been released. That relief is coherence returning. The field responds to that coherence instantly, not because it was waiting for you to try harder, but because the signal is finally clear. This is why teaching can never produce recognition directly. Teaching can only point. Recognition happens privately, internally, without ceremony. And once it happens, there is no going back. You do not unrecognize a truth. You may forget it temporarily, but its imprint remains. Recognition is not an achievement. It is a collapse of illusion. And collapse requires no effort. It requires alignment. The moment alignment is present, the mechanism activates on its own. You are not changing because you are learning something new. You are changing because you are remembering something fundamental. And memory does not move forward. It returns. When it does, reality adjusts to match what you now recognize as yourself. There comes a point when the old self no longer argues for its survival. Not because it was defeated, corrected, or improved, but because it has nothing left to negotiate. This is not a dramatic ending. There is no confrontation. There is simply a quiet withdrawal of energy. What once demanded attention no longer asks. What once required justification no longer speaks. Outdated identities dissolve this way. They do not shatter. They fade. The inner conflict that once felt constant begins to thin, not because it was resolved, but because the premise that sustained it is no longer believed. When an identity stops feeling real, it does not need to be dismantled. It simply stops functioning. Most people think change requires closure. An explanation. A final conversation with the past. But stabilization does not require resolution. It requires disengagement. The moment you stop negotiating with an old version of yourself, coherence returns on its own. The system no longer wastes energy maintaining contradictions. This is why the collapse feels quiet. There is no relief rush. No sense of victory. Just a subtle recognition that the struggle is no longer relevant. You notice you are not defending certain behaviors anymore. You are not rationalizing patterns. You are not questioning why you feel different. The conversation has ended because there is no longer anyone invested in continuing it. The mind often misinterprets this as apathy. In truth, it is alignment. When identity stabilizes, internal debate disappears. There is no longer a need to convince yourself to move forward or stay behind. Movement becomes natural because resistance has withdrawn. The old self stops negotiating when it realizes it cannot bargain its way into coherence. It was built for a different frequency. When that frequency changes, the identity loses leverage. It cannot argue its relevance into existence. It can only persist as long as attention feeds it. When attention shifts, it dissolves without conflict. This is also why you may feel less compelled to explain yourself to others. Explanation is a form of negotiation. When you are no longer negotiating internally, the urge to justify externally fades. You do not need agreement to remain stable. Stability does not require witnesses. Notice how little effort this takes. You are not actively letting go. You are not forcing detachment. You are simply no longer participating in the old dialogue. Participation was the only thing sustaining it. When participation ends, coherence restores itself. Stabilization follows naturally. Without internal contradiction, the signal becomes clean. Decisions feel obvious. Boundaries feel effortless. You do not need to convince yourself to choose differently. The choice has already been made at the level of identity. This is not becoming someone new. It is becoming consistent. The parts of you that were misaligned fall silent. The parts that remain do not need to speak loudly. They simply operate. If you feel a strange calm where there used to be tension, trust it. You are not losing depth or intensity. You are losing interference. The old self is not being punished or erased. It has simply finished its role. When negotiation ends, stabilization begins. And stabilization does not announce itself. It settles. Quietly. Completely. Before anything else can land, one final orientation must be revealed. You were never inside the world looking out. The world has always appeared inside you. This is not philosophy. It is recognition. The shift you have been moving toward resolves here, not as an idea, but as a quiet reversal of perspective. You are not a fragment of reality navigating an external field. You are the field in which reality appears. The sense of being located somewhere specific, inside a body, inside a life, inside a timeline, is a perceptual convenience. Useful, but incomplete. When attention relaxes, it becomes obvious that experience is happening within awareness, not to it. Thoughts arise. Sensations arise. Circumstances arise. And all of them appear in the same place. Awareness. This is why the world has always mirrored you. Not symbolically, but structurally. A mirror does not decide what to reflect. It reflects whatever stands before it. Consciousness works the same way. What you experience is not happening independently of you. It is happening as a modulation within you. The field you have been trying to influence is what you are. When this is seen, the struggle to control outcomes dissolves. Control only makes sense when you believe you are separate from what you are trying to manage. Separation creates effort. Unity creates coherence. The moment you recognize yourself as the space in which experience unfolds, effort becomes unnecessary. Reflection becomes automatic. This does not mean the world disappears or becomes unreal. It means its role changes. Events no longer define you. They inform you. Circumstances no longer dictate identity. They echo it. You stop reacting to life as if it is happening against you and begin observing how it responds to your state without resistance. This realization also removes the burden of self-improvement. There is no smaller self that needs to evolve into something greater. There is only awareness recognizing its own patterns. When a pattern no longer fits, it dissolves. When a pattern aligns, it stabilizes. Nothing needs to be forced because nothing is separate. You were never meant to master the world. You were meant to recognize your position relative to it. The moment you stop trying to stand inside experience and instead notice experience standing within you, everything reorganizes. The pressure to get somewhere fades. The need to fix yourself fades. What remains is clarity. This is why so many shifts happened without effort throughout this process. You were not changing reality from the outside. You were recognizing yourself from the inside. Each recognition adjusted the reflection naturally. The mirror did not need instruction. It responded automatically. From here, life feels less personal and more precise. Less dramatic and more responsive. You are not detached. You are intimate with everything because everything appears within the same field of awareness you are. You were never inside the world trying to find your place. The world has always been appearing within you, responding to your state, reflecting your coherence. When this is seen, there is nothing left to chase. There is only alignment unfolding where it always has. It can feel, looking back, as though nothing was happening for a long time. As though requests went unanswered, intention stalled, effort disappeared into silence. That interpretation is understandable, but it is inaccurate. There was never a delay. There was never a failure. The field has been responding continuously, precisely, without interruption. What changed over time was your ability to read the response. Response does not always look like reward. It often looks like redirection. When the field reflects misalignment, it does so by introducing friction, repetition, or emotional contraction. Not as punishment, but as information. Every experience you labeled as a setback was feedback pointing to a mismatch between identity and direction. The signal was always accurate, even when it was uncomfortable. The illusion of delay arises when you expect response to arrive in a specific form. When it doesn't, the mind assumes nothing happened. In reality, the response arrived exactly as needed to refine the signal. Reality does not prioritize comfort. It prioritizes coherence. When coherence is missing, the field reflects that absence clearly, over and over, until recognition occurs. Failure is a narrative imposed after the fact. The field does not fail to respond. It cannot. It reflects whatever state is present. When outcomes did not match your expectations, it was not because you were ignored. It was because the expectation itself was misaligned. The reflection was accurate, even if the interpretation was not. This reframing removes self-blame entirely. There was never something wrong with you. There was never a moment you were off track. There were only signals being mirrored back, inviting recalibration. The moment recalibration occurred, the reflection changed. That is not delay. That is responsiveness. Notice how this perspective alters memory. Experiences that once felt heavy begin to lose their emotional charge. Not because they were justified, but because their function is now clear. They were not obstacles. They were adjustments. They were the field communicating in the only way it can, through experience. The field does not communicate with language. It communicates with pattern. Repetition means something is being reinforced. Friction means something is being questioned. Ease means alignment has stabilized. Every phase you moved through carried information. None of it was wasted. None of it was arbitrary. This is why looking back often reveals a strange precision. Certain things could not move forward until others fell away. Certain realizations could not land until resistance softened. What felt like delay was sequencing. What felt like denial was protection. What felt like loss was release. The field was always responding to your state, not your requests. When you understand this, impatience dissolves. You stop demanding immediate outcomes and start noticing immediate feedback. You stop interpreting silence as abandonment and recognize it as a mirror of stillness or waiting within you. The relationship with reality becomes collaborative rather than adversarial. Nothing was withheld from you. Nothing was delayed out of indifference. Everything unfolded in response to who you were being in each moment. As identity shifted, so did reflection. The responsiveness never stopped. Only the interpretation changed. Now, with clarity, the past no longer needs to be judged or repaired. It can be seen accurately. As a dialogue. As a conversation between state and reflection. And when that is seen, the idea of failure collapses completely. There was only feedback, always guiding you toward coherence, always responding, exactly as the field is designed to do. There is nothing left to chase now. No threshold to cross. No future moment where alignment finally begins. What has been unfolding quietly through recognition, release, and stabilization settles here. This is the timeline you stabilize now, not because you forced it into place, but because nothing in you is resisting it anymore. Stabilization feels different from excitement. It is calm, grounded, almost ordinary. The nervous system is not bracing for impact or waiting for proof. It is at ease. This ease is not indifference. It is certainty without urgency. When a timeline stabilizes, it no longer needs your attention to hold it together. It holds itself. Notice how there is no sense of arrival. No dramatic shift announcing completion. That is how you know this is real. Dramatic shifts belong to effort. Stabilized realities feel natural because they are coherent with who you are now. You are not adapting to this timeline. It is adapting to you. Inevitability replaces hope here. Hope implies uncertainty. Inevitability implies alignment. You are no longer wondering if things will work out or when movement will happen. You feel a quiet knowing that whatever unfolds next will unfold from the same coherence that brought you here. The future does not need management when the present is stable. This does not mean life becomes predictable. It means it becomes responsive. You move, and reality moves with you. You pause, and reality recalibrates. There is no sense of being outpaced or left behind. The field is no longer something you negotiate with. It mirrors you effortlessly because the signal is clear. Stabilization also removes the need to explain yourself. You do not need to convince others that something has changed. You do not need external validation to confirm alignment. The internal noise that once demanded reassurance is gone. When identity is consistent, proof is unnecessary. This is how timelines lock in. Not through repetition or maintenance, but through non-interference. You are not trying to preserve this state. You are allowing it to remain because it matches you. Effort would only destabilize it. Trust keeps it intact. From here, movement will happen without anticipation. Opportunities will appear without being summoned. Decisions will feel obvious instead of conflicted. This is not because life has become easier, but because resistance has thinned. When resistance thins, response accelerates naturally. There is nothing else you need to learn to make this work. There is nothing else you need to fix about yourself. The identity that could not stabilize this timeline has already dissolved. What remains is sufficient. What remains is coherent. Let this be simple. Let it be quiet. Let it be enough. If this message resonated with you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear this.